Recently, I was sent a link to a video lecture on the hyperbolic geometry of DMT experiences by Andrés Emilsson, recorded at Stanford University, and I was fascinated by the logical breakdown of the theories behind the geometry of psychedelic trips presented by Andrés. So I decided to get in touch with him and invite him to a podcast. We had a fantastic discussion, and I want to let you listen to it now. Andrés Gómez Emilsson is a co-director of research at Qualia Research Institute, a non-profit research group studying consciousness and developing a precise mathematical language for describing our subjective experiences. Andrés has a master's degree in computational psychology from Stanford University. He was also the co-founder of the Stanford Transhumanist Association, and his current work focuses on algorithm design, psychedelic theories, neurotechnology development, and mapping and studying of the computational properties of consciousness. If you enjoy this conversation, please sponsor 434 through methods listed on the screen and in the video description, and go to b434.com for more links. Enjoy! Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me. I'm really fascinated by everything you say, and it all started when someone sent me your video about the DMT, the relationship between DMT geometry and the depth of the actual trip. And we normally have like this ocean of I call it hippie content on social media. Basically, people just concentrating on tripping and going to festivals. There's very little content where people have like a scientific approach. So when I saw what you were doing, I was like, that's someone I definitely need to listen to. And then when I started listening to you, I realized that you're like a real scientist. Am I right in assuming that you're like you have like academical background?
Right. Well, yeah. It's well. First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for being so interested in this research. I do have a master's in computational psychology from Stanford. I did write a bunch of papers back in the day, mostly concentrating on affective neuroscience. Basically, what makes what is the neural substrate of different types of feelings. So that was something I'm very interested in. That said, I never pursued a PhD because during my master's, I really felt there was not much of an opportunity to actually do the research I was the most interested in, which is very much like consciousness focused. Unfortunately, basically in psychology departments and philosophy departments, computer science departments, people basically work with very different background assumptions about consciousness. Things such as like, hey, consciousness is just information processing, or there's nothing particularly special about it. Whereas it's like, hey, come on, guys. Like, actually, there's these, insane hyperbolic, hyper valuable states of consciousness just right around the corner, and everybody seems to be ignoring them. But actually, they're profoundly significant. And I worked a couple years in the field of machine learning and AI, and as a software engineer. And eventually I realized that I was thinking about consciousness nonstop pretty much every day, and basically coming from work and just writing blog posts and talking to people about consciousness. And it's like, okay, actually, it sounds like I really want this to be kind of a full-time job. And thankfully, I've been able to find a cluster of like really wonderful people who kind of like are very happy to tag along in kind of this project. So we founded the Qualia Research Institute, got some funding, and we're actually doing real, very rigorous neuroscience to study all sorts of exotic states of consciousness, and more importantly, tie it all together in a unified theory for, what makes experiences feel good, feel bad, and ultimately, what is the information processing role of consciousness? Anyway, this is a lot of concepts, but kind of just to roughly answer your question.
Yes, I was actually looking at all your papers, everything you wrote, all the speeches. There's so much, but I noticed that you put a big emphasis on the emotional side of everything. And I initially labeled you as the psychedelics guy, but then I quickly realized that there's so much more. And it it overlapped basically with my interests. So the reason why I decided I need to get in touch with you is that you see supernatural phenomena in numbers. So basically, you process the unexplainable with logic and math, and that's something that I'm trying to do. And I consider myself to be quite successful in connecting the dots and understanding what this reality is about. When I say successful, obviously I'm talking about my subjective feeling, because it seems like there's not many people who understand how everything works, and also not many people have this wealth of experiences with psychedelics, and not many people approach it in an analytical way. Most people just enjoy the visuals and the hallucinations. What I do is I try to always do close-eyed visuals and meditation, and try to go to the bottom of it. And I've met a few people, not many, just a few, who have the same approach. And we started building this 44 community of people who exchange information. Turns out that there's quite a few people who try to get to the bottom of the whole thing. Not many people have this scientific approach. So what I liked is when I started listening to your speeches and reading your articles, I like that you make me think, because you discover connections between seemingly unrelated facts, and they turn out to be very important. Like this, this type of geometric visions that people get on DMT, and you build a correlation to the depth of the actual trip, which is a phenomenal discovery for me. It never occurred to me that you could do that. So you discover connections that I don't see, also connections that I can not have much experience with, because I have a lot of experience with mushrooms, but not anything else. So your experience is obviously much more valuable and much more interesting to listen to. It seems like you're also indexing the metaphysical and you're explaining the unexplainable. That's what I really like. And I think you used the term, you described someone, you called them rational psychonaut. And I think that's what I would call you as. So someone who looks at things from like a logical academical perspective. So tell me, what is your theory? Maybe let's start from talking about consciousness, because it seems like it's something you're very interested in. What is your theory? What is consciousness?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, just to briefly comment on what you said. I mean, I think like a very big, issue is that people really kind of like get caught up in kind of personal development narratives during psychedelic experiences. And it's kind of like if you go on a safari and during the safari you're like too worried about like your breakup with your girlfriend or something like that. You come back and they ask you like, okay, but what animals did you see? Like, what was the landscape like? And all you can actually remember is, oh, well, I processed some information about my girlfriend.
The emotional turmoil, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of psychedelic reports are kind of like that.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I mean, I'll mention this and we can come back to it, but I essentially think that there is a fascinating dual relationship between basically the raw kind of like sensory quality of a psychedelic experience and the emotional processing that is going on. That like in fact like the patterns and the textures of experience that you're having, they're not incidental. I mean, like a lot of people consider them, it's kind of like, oh, that's just the the foam on top of the ocean. Like what truly matters has nothing to do with the visuals or the auditory hallucinations or anything like that. But if you pay attention to it, you actually will notice that emotional processing has a kind of dual relationship with the textures of experience. And I mean, I'll just drop this and then answer your first question, which is that indeed, I mean, I think like basically dissonant patterns actually are encoding negative emotions. And that's kind of like a really important discovery, because once you notice that, you can actually optimize your emotional processing by developing a kind of algebra for how to commute different dissonant patterns with each other and transform them into something harmonious. Okay, so anyway, I'll just say that. And to answer your question, what is consciousness? So there are, something like 10 different definitions to what consciousness is. All of them are interesting. So, I don't want to fight anybody who says like, hey, like, I don't think that's consciousness, because honestly, all of those definitions are fascinating on their own way.
I'm really interested in hearing after all these years of research, I want to know what conclusions you came to, because I want to know your side of the whole thing, because that's what really matters probably. What dots did you connect?
Fantastic. Yes. How I think of consciousness is basically the entirety of your experience right now is your bubble of experience. And your bubble of experience is a moment of consciousness. So in brief, during even just a single second, you experience many bubbles of experience. And it's very interesting because each of those bubbles of experience have the feeling of being connected to the previous ones, in some sense being a continuation of the previous ones. And that is true in a way. On the other hand, they're also different bubbles. They're like different actual events that happen. And the continuity might also be a bit of an illusion, that actually the feeling of time passing is also a quality that exists in each of those bubbles of experience. So, I mean, it's sort of like if you were to like read a comic, but like within each square of the comic, there are also kind of like a little recap of what happened in the previous squares. So that like, even if you just look at one square, you also get a sense of like what's going on, what just happened, that give you kind of like context of like what this experience is about.
So you're explaining the complexity of the actual human experience at the moment, is that right?
Yeah, you could say that, and also making the claim that it's a series of discrete experiences, and that the way we've managed to get a lot of mileage in kind of breaking down the full structure, of a human experience. Some of it comes from like realizing that there's kind of these like discrete moments of experience, but there's like many other principles that are also like really, really important and very helpful, which I can go over. But maybe we can stay on consciousness for a bit. Yeah.
What I'm trying to figure out after 5 years of psychedelic insight into the nature of human experience and the nature of this reality in general is, what's the source of consciousness? Where does it come from? What do you think?
Right. Okay. So going for the big questions. So, well, I am a panpsychist, so I very much believe that basically the fields of quantum mechanics are actually fields of qualia. And I don't know if you have a good sense of what the word qualia refers to.
No, maybe explain it.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite word, and not only because it's the name of.
Yeah.
It's really cool because it's a concept that I thought of when I was a kid, and a bunch of kids also think about this, and but usually adults around them, they don't have a word to describe this, so they forget. So qualia comes up when you ask the question, is the blue that I see the same blue that you see, right? And how would we know? Because if there's the color wheel, and maybe you had like an inverted color wheel relative to me, every time you've seen the color red, we have called it blue, so you kind of like think it's blue, or at least like that's kind of the common language we use to talk about that quality of experience. So in that sense, qualia here refers to the raw subjective quality of the sensations that you experience. So it's not blue in the sense of a frequency of light, it's blue in the sense of the blueness of blue that you can experience. Do you get what I mean?
Yes, this is basically a perfect word that describes a lot of things that happen in psychedelic visions. This is basically how I feel about many aspects of the messages that I get, because they're very subjective. They do explain a lot how I feel about a given aspect of a vision, but it doesn't really translate into human language. And I think this qualia, this whatever you're using to describe, is actually a very good description of I'm not sure if I get it completely, but I think it's something that talks a lot about how you feel about a given aspect of something, right?
Yeah.
No, not even close.
No. It's really close. So I'll just distinguish that there is a difference between what you feel about something, which is kind of a secondary reaction, and then like the raw, immediate way in which the first experience actually felt. So, but qualia is really important as a concept for psychedelic experiences because, a lot of people who haven't tried mushrooms, for example, they imagine that it's like if you take mushrooms, it's just like you get a normal human experience, but it's kind of scrambled, right? Like maybe you see a human with the face of a dog or something weird like that, or there's kind of like scrambled colors in your visual field. But actually, it's far more profound than that, because not only do you experience kind of a remix of human qualia, of the sounds and touch and emotions that we have, you also experience completely novel qualia. I mean, it's sort of like we don't know currently, how a bat experiences echolocation. Just as an example, it probably has a very unique qualia. And likewise, if you haven't taken psychedelics, people on psychedelics, you should think of them as like a sort of like bat, in the sense of like, yeah, they probably have some aspects of experience that you simply don't know exist. They're like actually new qualia. One of them being, for example, this feeling of waves of energy propagating outside your body and reflecting off of objects and kind of like creating these kind of like resonant harmonics and puns and things like that like happens in mushrooms very, very reliably, but you don't experience naturally. So that would be kind of like an example of a psychedelic qualia.
So basically, this is to translate it to human language, that would be empirical quality of a given feature, right?
The subjective quality of a given
empirical,
yes.
In a way, the experiences. Yeah. Is that a word that you came up with yourself, or is it an actual word that exists in the English language?
It's an actual word.
Right.
It's been for maybe like several hundred years. It's a very classic philosophy word. Yep.
Right. I've never heard it. But tell me, when you discuss this qualia, for example, what circles do you talk about this in? Is it mainly academical circles, or is it a group of people, like a community of people who understand this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say there's probably a couple clusters of people that are like pretty receptive. So there is this, you could call it, community, so-called community. No, I mean, I really like them in general, but there's like this, you could think of them as like a movement, which is the rationalist movement. Basically, figures in it include people like Eliezer Yudkowsky and Scott Alexander, who writes the blog Slate Star Codex. Well, now it's called Astral Codex 10. But anyway, this is kind of like a cluster of people who are like generally really smart and like pretty technical, but also like really open to like a lot of interesting things, ranging from AI to consciousness and whether computers can be conscious. And actually they're very concerned about like AI kind of like escaping the box. And so they
should be. I made a video about this. I think it's something that should be of great concern to everyone.
Definitely. So this group is probably the group that I feel like they have actually kind of a shot at actually reducing the risk of it, because they have like a very very rigorous and very, very good kind of set of methods. Basically there's this whole field called AI safety that wouldn't exist without these people. I mean, Eliezer Yudkowsky is pretty much a founder of the field.
Really?
Yeah. It's and if any of the readers is interested for like a really fun fiction written by Eliezer Yudkowsky that kind of like shows you his mindset, it's it's a fan fiction called Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, and it's so fun. I mean, basically, it's like the world of Harry Potter, but imagine that Harry Potter was like really curious and like kind of like had a scientific mindset. So like rather than just like accepting magic, it's kind of like, wait, how does this work? And like then doing experiments and figuring out, you know.
I understand. So basically, it's Harry Potter just taking the NZT 64 from Limitless, right? Have you seen Limitless?
Oh, yeah. Something like that.
He's taking the pill where he's becoming super smart and scientific now. But basically, these are the... Because what I'm trying to understand is, what are you doing with this knowledge now? Are you a researcher? Are you an academic now? What are you doing?
Yes. Well, we are an independent research institute, which is a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit for very deep reasons. I mean, we do have some technology that eventually we want to actually commercialize, but we are not turning the institute into a for-profit institute, because if we do that, essentially the forces of the market and the weight of money actually might bias.
Freedom.
Yeah, exactly. It will bias the research in specific directions, whereas we want to keep it like really clean and basically just aiming towards like truth finding. The big objective, maybe more context, which is transhumanists is kind of like the other big context. Basically, I was the co-founder of the Stanford Transhumanist Association back in the day, and a very, very influential philosopher in me has been David Pearce, who basically is a British philosopher, super nice guy. And his whole kind of idea is that it seems that eliminating suffering in the world, it's basically possible, and it's kind of like a technical problem. And and basically there's like a lot of reasons to suspect that it might actually be possible to prevent suffering in the future at a large scale, in pretty much throughout the living world, perhaps not only even in humans, but across the species.
So just to touch on this shortly, because there's a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about in terms of psychedelics, but just briefly, talk to me about how you see transhumanism, because for me, this word, unfortunately, recently became synonymous with anti-humanism. It's the thing that is propagated by Elon Musk and Joe Rogan on social media. They are all for fusing, technology with the human body, and it doesn't sound to me like something that will help us. I think it will be to our detriment. It won't be really a good thing. How do you see this?
Definitely. I mean, I definitely have kind of a mixed feelings, because the term transhumanism is used in many ways, but the circles that I hang out in, I actually agree quite a bit with the way in which they think of transhumanism, and especially actually that is kind of the lineage that actually came up with the term many years ago. There's this fun thing in the Bay Area. You could say that there's like a lot of really smart people that hang out together, and like maybe the thing that unites them over time changes. Right now it's more kind of AI safety, but in the 2010s it was transhumanism. But transhumanism, the positive vision here is the creation of what we call a triple S society, which is a society that has everybody in that society has super happiness, super intelligence, and super longevity. And basically we think this is possible. Personally, I don't think that we can actually merge with digital computers. So my interest is not very much on the enhancement via digital computers sort of thing. I'm actually much more interested in things like consciousness enhancing in particular ways, whether it happens to be with substances or with particular types of meditation, or ultimately, I know this probably will be a little bit controversial, but ultimately like genetic enhancement. I do think that's quite feasible. I mean, just to give you like a hint of like why we think it's not like insane, is, in brief, there is this gene that is called the NCN9A gene. And just modulating that one gene, you can modulate quite a bit your pain threshold. So, I mean, and this is like, I recognize that the label transhumanism usually evokes in people this feeling of like, hey, like, you know, these kind of very macho people who want to be super strong and like, you know, androids or cyborgs or something like that. Whereas to me, it's more like, hey, actually, we are currently existing in a vast ethical emergency, which is there's so many people suffering so deeply. And we actually just need like technologies to get rid of that suffering. I mean, generally speaking, I'm not very, how do you say it, like romantic about many aspects of life. Basically, I do think there's like a lot of like very big things that ideally should be fixed. And basically things like increasing our pain thresholds, or at the very least preventing people who would have very low pain thresholds from having them, and instead having them to be slightly higher. So some mutations of the NCN9A gene basically make you have pain all the time. So like some people like that are called like, for example, like women on fire or something like that, which is that it's like, okay, it feels like it's burning all the time, all the life, right? So that's like a really horrible mutation that you could have. There's also mutations of that gene where you have no pain at all, which is also not ideal because you end up having like a life expectancy.
Pain is useful,
like,
obviously,
Yeah, you need a little bit. But then there's, people who have like another variant of it where they have higher pain threshold, but they're actually really functional. And if you study their lives, they actually are like really happy, usually pretty pro-social, and for the most part, like very well adapted people who are just kind of immune to like deep depression or chronic pain. And like that seems like, something I would actually like for, my children or my children's children.
So you have this organic approach to transhumanism. You basically are trying to enhance the human experience, make it better, right? So my problem with this would be that unfortunately everything that we develop as humans, it always ends up in the wrong hands. And the best example recently would be the robots that they're developing. And I think it's very similar how they will deal with this type of transhumanism, the human enhancement, because the first thing they'll probably do is they'll create super soldiers. And we can see this by this company now who used to make robots. They were called Boston Dynamics. I think they were bought by somebody else. So it's called something else, but the robots already exist and they're being used in army and police forces now. So you can see these robots, these little dog robots that are being used. They're not being used to, fix anything. They're being used as tiny, soldiers, pretty much. That's the first thing they'll do. And I think they even talk about this openly. The military-industrial complex, they talk openly about actually enhancing humans to use them as soldiers first. So that would be my concern.
Oh, it's a huge concern. I mean, that's very, very important to point out. And I do have, you could say, sleepless nights where I worry about abuse of technology. It's also one of the reasons why we're keeping QRI as like a nonprofit, again, so that we don't, I don't know, the metaphor is kind of like tying yourself to the mast for, to avoid the siren calls of particular temptations and so on. That, basically, I would strongly be against like any kind of like contract with military agencies or, basically anything of the sort.
So you're completely independent. You're not tied to any institution, no university, nothing like that.
Well, only we collaborate with universities, and that's its own thing. Like, for example, we obviously don't have the capacity or the permits to gather neuroimaging data of people on psychedelics or on other exotic states of consciousness. But we're friends and are collaborating with various research groups at universities that do have access to that data. So in a sense, we now, thanks to those partnerships, we do have a bunch of data of people on MDMA and on DMT and on jhana meditation, which is these advanced stages of concentration. All of them are like valence tagged, meaning that we also have like data about like whether they were feeling good or bad at the time, and that type of data is extremely important for our research, right? So in that sense, yes, I mean, academic partnerships are really important, but at the core of it, yes, we are completely independent. I mean, like nobody can actually tell us what to do, and that's that's something that I value. I value very highly.
So tell me, well, I mean, let's talk about this main thing, this main video that made me so intrigued. You charting the psychedelic space. So can you tell people a little bit about this?
So at a very, very, to a first approximation, let's put it that way, the state space of consciousness, which I define as, the range of possible experiences that exist out there. And it's one of the things that we want to map out. Basically, what is these like huge combinatorial space of like possible qualia that you can have. And to a first approximation, one way you can kind of describe this state space is along two dimensions, which is A, the energy level of the consciousness, and B, the information content in the consciousness. Yeah, so the height, the energy level will approximately correspond to the dose of a psychedelic like, well, any tryptamine or DMT. Whereas the horizontal position, like how much complexity and information content, that is going to be dependent on the individual, on the set and setting, and on the specific drug. So I often contrast 5-MeO DMT versus regular DMT, which they both raise energy dramatically. I mean, like they push you to kind of the breakthrough level. They can take you to breakthrough levels of energy, which is, I mean, I'm sure maybe you've experienced those, but it's like insane amount of energy. I mean, like, I'd estimate at the very least 10 times more energy than a normal consciousness, but probably more.
So when you say energy, you basically, this is what I described as the depth of the actual psychedelic experience. So you're talking at the end of it will be probably lots of ego and heroic dose, right?
Yeah. Okay. Which, as an aside, I think I don't recommend to people taking heroic doses.
No. I always tell everybody to not do this if you're not ready or experienced.
Yeah. I'm glad, because there's so many people in psychedelic spheres who have kind of this ego issue attached to heroic doses, and it's no. Not good. But I mean, on DMT or 5-MeO, you can dip your toes and come back. It's not a huge commitment, like 5 grams of mushrooms or something like that.
That's a huge commitment. That's obviously all depending on somebody's threshold, because my heroic dose that brought me on the edge of insanity was actually 4 grams of cubensis B+. And it turned out it's because to have a normal trip, I need only something like 0.5 gram. So I always tell people to take only 1 gram and just see what happens. But I just wanted to hear from you what is going on with these visions, because I've noticed they do have like repeated, not pattern, but like a repeated mechanism of functioning to them. Yeah. And this seems what you discovered.
Again, I'm just tempted to start talking and sharing everything, but I'll pace myself. So, I mean, the state space, like energy and complexity, basically, like DMT can take you to the same level of energy, but usually will be in the higher complexity than 5-MeO DMT. However, they can both take you to very similar places depending on the trip. But roughly speaking, the machine elf type experiences would usually be kind of in the middle complexity level, where there's actually a lot of information and very complex and detailed information. Whereas like something like 5-MeO DMT or like a jhana meditation are like all the way to the left, where basically there's close to no information. And basically there is this dual relationship between amount of information and amount of symmetry. Like this is a very important concept in physics in general, which is that information comes from breaking symmetries. So in a sense, when something is perfectly symmetrical, like a sphere or something like that, it's almost like it doesn't have any information. There's nothing you can really tell about it other than like, hey, it's a sphere. Whereas if you find a deformation in the sphere, you can say like, oh, it's a sphere, but it's modified. You can kind of describe it in terms of how many steps away from a perfectly symmetrical state it is. And what I know is that 5-MeO DMT tends to push towards extremely high levels of symmetry. So these kind of like nirvanic states of consciousness that can be high energy, but have like close to zero information. They're extremely smooth and regular and uniform. There's no boundaries, complete feeling of dissolution with the cosmos, and so on. Whereas DMT has a lot of internal boundaries and complexity, and there's a feeling of a self and another that arises. How neuroscientists think of consciousness, for the most part, is kind of like this emergent epiphenomena that happens from information processing. Whereas the way we think at Qualia Research about consciousness is that it's actually the ground of being, and it has actually useful computational properties. So I'm not saying that consciousness is quantum mechanical, although it could be. Like I'm very open to actually consciousness being quantum mechanical, but you don't need it to be quantum mechanical for it to have what we call holistic properties. And if you have a quantum computer, like the whole reason why you build a quantum computer is that the quantum chips do holistic computing. Like when you're playing with a quantum coherent state, the entirety of the state evolves as one. It evolves coherently. And basically, if you influence any part of it, the whole changes instantaneously.
Exactly. This is a very good, because I'm listening to you, but I want to stop you for a second, because this actually, you're talking about what I wanted to ask you. So when you're saying that there are different stages of experience, different energy, you call it, right?
Yeah.
So basically, at some point you have the basic one, then you go into machine elves, and then you go into the information part. That's how it's defined on your chart. Is that correct?
Yeah, the stages that I've identified, well, it's just there's probably better names, but I call them threshold.
Just, in lay terms, pretty much. Just for a typical regular psychonaut, that's what you would expect to experience depending on the dose of DMT or any other psychedelic. Now, you having all of this experience, I want to know from you, what do you think about this? Because me and my friend Star Pilot, we have this thing, this is very distinct to the rest of Psychonaut, that when we take mushrooms, there are no stages, because we immediately get in contact with the entities and we start getting loads of uploads and information. There's no build-up. I mean, there is a small physical build-up. There's no such a thing as different stages. It's just on. And then when it's on, it's just communication with the entities, very, very smooth. It's telepathic, teachings start, and a huge exchange of information. And it doesn't matter how much more energy goes into this trip or this psychedelic state. It's always the same. The entities never leave and the upload of information never stops. Of course, unless you go to the area of distortion where the fabric of reality breaks down and you basically on heroic dose, you go through ego, that kind of stuff. But everything between that is just the same. It's informational upload and machine elf contact. What would you make out of it?
Two things. I guess I'll start with one, which is it's possible that you do still experience different stages. It's just that because they are like wrapped up in this narrative, you may not realize kind of like those differences at the moment. So, I mean, like comparing, for example, a 4-dimensional object to a 5th-dimensional object, right? Like there is a difference. And it could be that at the beginning of your message, the message that you receive, you're getting basically kind of these four-dimensional objects unfolding, and maybe towards the middle of the message, you're actually getting five-dimensional objects unfolding that encode information. And then towards the end of the trip, maybe you get back to fourth dimensional. Relative to our normal everyday life, you could say, well, they were all hyperdimensional. They were all kind of part of the same thing. But I would suspect that at the peak of the experience, you probably were experiencing something that was somewhat higher dimensional than when the message started. I don't know if that resonates.
Yeah, well, the problem we have is that maybe it's just me and StarPilot are very, very different in terms of emotional perception, because we heavily concentrate on the emotional aspect of the message. At least me personally, I don't pay attention to what type of a message that is, how it's, because you're right, some of it is telepathic, some of it is a bit different. It feels different. There's a lot of different sensations attached to a given message. Some of them are just simple uploads. Some of them are very complex emotional roller coasters. So you're right. It's just that we're so heavily concentrated on solving our problems, because it's like a psychotherapy to us. We're so concentrated on getting all this information from the psychedelic Google. We don't really pay attention to it. But do you think that all of this changes depending on the type of a psychedelic that you use to go through to those energy stages that you describe?
Quite a bit. Quite a bit. I mean, like DMT and 5-MeO DMT seem to have something special that allows them to take you to much higher levels, higher energy, which ultimately will manifest as more hyperbolic curvature and higher dimensions. But I mean, with other substances, it happens. I would say, for example, salvia can take you to high energy, but its attractors are not actually symmetrical, and they're not like high valence. So salvia would push you, generally speaking, towards kind of the close to the extreme right in the chart, where it's kind of like noise or like a lot of complexity, but it's like tending towards noise. But it can be very high energy. So yeah, I mean, basically, just as a rough idea is like all psychedelics can take you to maybe up to like magic eye level, but DMT and 5-MeO DMT and salvia can take you higher, where 5-MeO is kind of in the extreme left, DMT is in the middle, and salvia is in the extreme right.
Where would you put psilocybin on this list?
I would say it's a kind of a DMT, like the texture and the quality of qualia on psilocybin is very close to DMT with a few notable differences. And I would put it very, very much in the middle. I mean, like it's kind of you're in the middle of the chart and you just kind of like go up. But it obviously depends on the trip. Like, we have reports of people who are like, very advanced meditators. And what you can do by combining meditation and psilocybin is actually push up and left so that you actually go to these, beautiful symmetrical repetition and hyperbolic honeycombs, which are like, basically very blissful, and they lack semantic content. I mean, they're just kind of like blissful God consciousness type of sensations,
yes.
But without like a message, so to speak. So that's something you can steer to here.
You described it perfectly, because every time I trip, I make a conscious choice between meditating and just enjoying this state, and I see these entities just patiently waiting. And then when I engage my thoughts and my communication process or whatever the thing is, I start communicating with them. I exchange information, and it's always the same. Do I want to feel great or do I want to learn something? And now, because there's this 434 community, I always want to get messages so that I can tell something new people, so that I can basically make a video out of it. And it's a bit of it's like a materialistic approach, because I would rather just spend these 4 hours enjoying myself and relaxing, but it's like I'm going to work and I'm just trying to get as much as I can out of this realm. So it's definitely something that I agree with. And the one thing that I wanted to say is what I really related to in your speeches and your articles is that the way you describe it, it's I'm not sure if this is typical for psilocybin, and you'll probably tell me about this, but when you talk about DMT, it feels like you're talking about my trips. So the reason I never took anything else other than mushrooms in my life is because every time someone approaches me with stories about DMT and trip reports, I go, yeah, that's what I experience. It's pretty much the same. And to me, I haven't tried DMT, but it sounds from your description and your chart is that it's like a typical mushroom trip for me. So the energy and the depth, that's, the visions that you described, that's pretty much what I experience on mushrooms, which seems to be very unusual because people have a very serious distinction between a mushroom trip and a DMT trip. How would you say they differ? How do you feel about them having that experience?
Yeah, they are subtly different. I have seen kind of like a wave of people claiming that very high dose psilocybin is indistinguishable from DMT. I suspect it's just very similar, that it's actually not indistinguishable. And I think like a couple of remarkable differences is psilocybin tends to be more ego deconstructing. So I would say kind of like psilocybin blends features of LSD and DMT in that like it does take you to kind of like the God consciousness, ego death type of experiences. Even at small doses, you can experience an ego death on psilocybin. Part of it, I think, has to do with kind of the balance of dopamine. That like DMT,
yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, like LSD, basically, a lot of people experience kind of more cognitive control on LSD than on psilocybin. Psilocybin kind of like takes you where it wants to take you, sort of thing. Whereas on LSD, it's kind of a psychedelic, but also a cognitive enhancer. Like that's why, basically microdosing LSD is a bit more of an intellectual type of experience than microdosing psilocybin, which is going to be more relaxed and open and artistic type of feeling. And DMT has kind of that dopaminergic quality that makes the experience more clear-headed. And I think if we were to map out kind of the probability of things like ego death on comparable levels of energy, psilocybin has way more of kind of the ego death quality, whereas DMT is very, very crazy that you can go to these, breakthrough levels of energy, but still kind of have a coherent operating system of like who you are and like what you're doing. And you don't instantly kind of forget that. Whereas on psilocybin, you absolutely can forget who you are, what you're doing.
Yes. It seems like other psychedelics leave you intact, whereas psilocybin deconstructs the very fabric of your consciousness or whatever that is that you're using to navigate this mushroom realm. And I've noticed that too. It's that's why I'm telling everybody to be very careful with the amount of mushrooms they take, because they have a very heavy body load and they can basically completely just deconstruct your reality in a way that it just takes away your ability to be a human. And that's the problem. I think you still need this a bit of a sensation that you're still in your body, because then it's easier to control the trip. When you take too much, and I can see like there's a spot on Cubensis B plus basically that if you go beyond like 0.9 to 1 gram, it starts being uncomfortable. And for me personally, it stops becoming a trip. It's more about controlling my consciousness. If I'm still alive, where I am, what's going on.
Yes.
That's the problem that I have.
Absolutely. And also preventing yourself from accidentally brainwashing yourself. Like that happens on higher doses, because I mean, this opens up kind of this whole topic of like neural annealing, which is that, I mean, I very much think this is something me and Mike Johnson, we have been working on, and Mike is a collaborator at Qualia Research, a good friend. Basically you can make an analogy between the energy level and something like temperature when you're like forging a metal. That basically when you heat up a metal, if the metal contains imperfections and like little like microcrystalline structure that makes it brittle, basically if you heat it up above what's called the recrystallization temperature, those crystals will basically melt. And if you cool it down slowly, they will all realign and actually become kind of this perfectly geometric lattice. And the metal will have like more strength and ductility. So basically, it's kind of like a way of repairing the metal. And that's something that oftentimes you need to do repeatedly with kind of like power tools and things like that like over time they kind of become cold worked. They get full of like imperfections and like dents, and you need to anneal or re-anneal in order to make it better. And likewise,
that's the Japanese method of crafting swords, right? Samurai swords.
Yes. They have a technique that involves annealing, exactly.
Yeah.
And basically, when you heat up your consciousness, heat up your brain mind with psychedelics, with that temperature change, basically, the higher the temperature, one of the things that happens is that the patterns of thought and feeling that you have accumulated, they break down because the temperature is too high. They literally, or not literally, figuratively, they melt, although phenomenologically it actually feels like it melts or becomes fiery or gaseous. All of those terms are actually also from Buddhism. You can also do the same with meditation. You can melt your body and so on. But yeah, I mean, basically at Qualia Research, we think that feeling of melting is very important, that it's actually breaking down a lot of the patterns in your consciousness. And as you calm down, or also as you experience like very high valence, blissful experiences, it reforges. And basically it's like, if, for example, you're feeling about your mother, just as a random example, if you feel negative about your mother, then you process the information on a psychedelic trip, you kind of like melt your internal representation of your mom. And as you calm down, you can basically crystallize a more positive representation of your mom or whoever. And but yeah, the thing is, if you take too high of a dose, you may be melting things that you didn't want to melt, and you may accidentally develop very strange beliefs that just happen to occur to you in the state, and they crystallize and they basically become part of the core of yourself.
That's a fascinating analogy. I never thought of it like this. This is the reason why I really enjoy reading what you write and what you have on your website, is because that's exactly what happens. I could never, I couldn't come up with this concept. I just knew that it helped. I knew that if I take too much, it just destroys you instead of helping you. But this analogy with metal, that's really, really interesting. What I wanted to ask you is, because you keep mentioning the importance of symmetry in your articles, and there's something that I noticed, and I wanted to ask you about this, because we talk about the theory of geometry and psychedelic visions, what they mean on your chart. It actually, they do have a meaning. This is something that I've noticed with Liberty Caps and Cubensis B+. These two I have experience with, and I noticed that Cubensis B+ is very structured divisions, and the contact is very, very robotic, very bionic, and it has a lot of symmetry in it. It's like sacred geometry to an extreme level where everything's beautiful, symmetrical, and just digital. Whereas when you take Liberty Caps, they make it chaotic. Everything is beautiful, it's chaotic, but it has nothing to do with the sacred geometry that Cubensis offers to you. So basically, Liberty Caps is like a bunch of hippies playing a guitar in an old, just an old car, sitting in a van with a fireplace and just smoking weed and talking. It is just chaos, but it's like loving chaos. Whereas Cubensis is very sit down, we're going to teach you something, and this is a digital school where every teacher is a robot. And they still love you, but it's very different. And I noticed that I don't enjoy the lack of symmetry. And I found an article that I think you wrote it, where symmetry is somehow related to positive mindset. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is pretty much our flagship hypothesis at this point. I mean, I would say the theory is called the symmetry theory of valence, and valence is a super important term that is very important to maybe unpack, because I mean, it roughly means how good or bad an experience feels. And it's not in any way, just kind of shallow hedonistic pleasure, which would turn off a lot of people, because valence also refers to kind of, very beautiful, loving, mystical experiences, or, even like the feeling of aha and wonder and awe that you experience when you solve a problem, or, a problem is fixed. So valence is like a very general term, and if there's many types of valence, right? Like you can sip on your tea and taste the sweetness of it, and the sweetness of it will have a valence associated with it, usually a positive one. So that's kind of like valence in the realm of gustatory experience. But there's also valence in terms of like positive, for example, emotional experiences, or pleasant touch, or pleasant visuals. Visuals can also be unpleasant or pleasant. And empirically, like this happens all over the place, whether it's like psychedelics or meditation or like temporal lobe epilepsy. In any of these situations, we find that basically supersymmetrical states tend to be extremely blissful. And I mean, roughly speaking, when you have a psychedelic experience and you see, for example, a perfectly symmetrical, beautiful chrysanthemum unfold in front of you, something that you can notice is that there is this duality between visual symmetry and temporal synchrony. So when your experience basically has a temporal component where you're basically made up of a lot of superimposed vibrational frequencies, we could say. We call them connectum harmonics, but it's kind of these situations where like the hippies are actually pointing at something absolutely real, that actually people have a kind of like a vibe, like a combination of vibrational frequencies, and that determines kind of like what your mood is and how you're feeling. And basically when those vibrational frequencies are in harmonic relationship with each other, they are in synchrony. And when you have synchrony, when basically different parts of your experience are firing in a synchronic way, they will tend to generate symmetrical visuals. So it's fascinating. I mean, like mathematically, there is this kind of like equivalence between spatial symmetry and temporal synchrony. I know that's a mouthful, but it's a really important insight that like if you, for example, use a stroboscopic stimulation, like flashing lights of different frequencies, if you're getting the same frequency in both of your eyes and they're in phase, the visuals that you will experience as an effect of the strobes will be symmetrical. But if the strobes are out of phase or they're like slightly different frequencies, the visuals will not be symmetrical. So in a sense, like the more symmetrical the patterns are on a psychedelic experience, that is a signature that you are in a harmonic relationship between your vibrational modes. Does that make sense?
It does, but what I'm wondering about is why is it that we have such a distinctive we just like symmetry. It's like in your article about faces, it has a lot to do with the video that I just made about phi number and the everything related to right proportions. And also I've noticed that I started developing this I don't like Liberty caps now, and I hope they don't get mad at me. The gods of mushrooms don't get mad at me, because here's the thing: when Liberty caps grow, they grow like those little asymmetrical, wonky type of weird mushrooms that are slimy. They're totally asymmetrical. They're just weird, like like the hippie experience is just weird. But when you grow a cubensis mushroom like B plus or golden teacher, it's a beautiful, usually very symmetrical mushroom, very simple in structure. And the visuals you get and the connection and everything, it's exactly the reflection of this shape. So there's some sort of a connection to symmetry in a physical sense to the symmetrical geometrical patterns. And as you now made me aware, yes, you're right. The emotions and cessation of harmony, that's also, so you could call it symmetry. That is also very different. It's less chaotic and very structured on Cubensis B+. And it's very different on Liberty Caps. And I'm saying that they're actually two different psychedelics. Even though they allow you to access the same realms and the same contact, the way it happens is very different. And me personally, I prefer much more the sensations I get from Cubensis mushrooms because they're like, they're like digital. They're like definable, and it's like computers. Everything's beautiful, well-defined. Liberty Caps divisions are beautiful too. It's just that they're crazy. They're just all over the place. They make no sense. It's just explosions everywhere. It's beautiful, but it's not the same. And I started feeling like Liberty Caps are not good quality mushroom, but I need to use them. And it's like this abusive type of relationship that I have with them now because I'm taking advantage of what they give me, but I don't really agree with how they do it. Whereas Cubensis is like this, this real girlfriend, and Liberty Caps is just this girlfriend that not so pretty, but I'm cheating on Cubensis with Liberty Caps. It's this type of an analogy, but that's how I feel. So I don't know if it's the same with other psychedelics. It's just what I know about mushrooms.
That is very interesting to hear. Like, I mean, right off the bat, my hypothesis here, and let me know what you think, is that Liberty Caps have more body load.
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah.
There you go. So body load basically is patterns of dissonance in your peripheral nervous system. Basically, your gut enteric nervous system. When it's upset, it's going to be sending dissonant patterns, and those dissonance patterns, again, like kind of these. Some people on psychedelics is like, oh, I don't care about body load or whatnot, but it absolutely affects your experience. If you have like this constant, stomach upset, is similar to, in our theory, as if you had kind of a very dissonant music playing right next to you. It's like, yeah, you can kind of ignore it and you can pay attention to the pretty things, but it's going to disrupt your mood, and it's going to disrupt your thought process. So basically, anything that causes body load is going to increase dissonance, reduce symmetry, reduce harmony between vibrational modes.
So are you saying that the visions that we get on these psychedelics are actually correlated or even a result of how we feel in a given moment? I mean, physically.
There's a extremely tight coupling between those two. Yes.
See, here's where I have a problem with this, because as you were saying this, I was trying to come up with ideas. I tend to get beautiful visions when I feel bad physically. So somehow it doesn't really, because I was thinking, is it possible to have an ugly vision and a beautiful feeling? And that's possible. And then I was thinking, is it possible to have a beautiful vision and feel horrible? And that's possible too.
Yeah.
How would you explain this?
I mean, I think it's possible. It's just a lot of these things, you should think of them as kind of risk factors. That basically high body load is a risk factor to experience a chaotic and kind of like more unpleasant experience with like more unpleasant visions, but it's not guaranteed. I mean, it's kind of like smoking doesn't necessarily will kill you early. It's just a risk factor. It makes it more likely.
Right. What do you make? What would you say about? Because I know you wrote about this too. The honeycomb geometry in psychedelic visions. Now, this is something that is repeatedly appearing in everybody's trip reports. It is something. It's like one of those universal things that everybody sees. It's beautiful geometrical patterns, honeycombs. Okay, before I go any further, just tell me, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so honeycomb, there are like the classical hexagonal honeycombs that we associate, precisely with bees, and that would be kind of like the basic Euclidean case, which is like one way in which you can cover a two-dimensional surface or space if you make it, you add depth to it. But and you can absolutely experience those on psychedelics, like on a low dose or like medium dose mushroom. The surfaces of experience will generally be tessellated, and one of the types of tessellations that exist is honeycombs. But you can also experience like tessellations with squares and triangles and more complex mixed shapes tessellations. But as you increase the energy parameter or the dose, basically higher dimensional honeycombs become possible. And at some dose, these places are called crystal worlds, which happen around like maybe 12 milligrams of DMT, where actually space itself becomes tessellated. So it's not just the surfaces around you, but you actually experience these three-dimensional, perfectly repeating symmetrical patterns. And basically the mathematical structure of that is that they are what we call space groups in math, and basically they describe all mineral structures. So whenever you actually experience one of these three-dimensional repeating patterns, that's going to correspond to a particular mineral. And I think like if we get really good at like noticing actually what are the symmetries in it, we could say like, oh, this is the symmetry of the quartz actually that I'm experiencing. And if you increase the dose higher, you will start experiencing these even more exotic things, which are hyperbolic honeycombs, which is what happens when you take a three-dimensional hyperbolic space and you divide it into symmetrical regions that cover it. And basically, hyperbolic honeycombs are extremely weird in the sense that like, you have to experience them in order to know that, oh my gosh, this is actually possible to experience. They're really blissful because they're like so symmetrically ordered. They balance the energy very well. They allow basically a free flow of waves of energy without self-interference or self-fighting, you might think of it. It's kind of like self-harmony. And also they have like very little information content, especially if you just like focus on them. Now, my interpretation is that they are attractors of the dynamic system that is our consciousness and our brain. They're like stable attractors, and kind of in the video on DMT, I was mentioning that basically feedback systems, such as like when you take a camera and you point it at its own feed to get kind of these like infinite recursion type experiences, that psychedelics are a lot like that. And when you're experiencing a honeycomb, it's sort of like you're experiencing a fixed point, meaning that the image that you record from the camera looks exactly the same as the image that gets fed into the TV. And in that sense, the image doesn't change, is a stable attractor. And any of these like high-dimensional hyperbolic honeycombs are stable attractors.
So you basically, now I'm trying to understand that your theory is that the visions that we get, they're easily definable because they can be interpreted in terms of human biology and reactions to a psychedelic substance. Is that right?
Yeah. Obviously, that might be underselling them because, as I was mentioning, on higher stages of DMT, you actually get to experience completely novel qualia as well as like novel computational properties of consciousness. So there's kind of like two extremes, you could say. And when one is like, okay, people who dismiss these experiences, perhaps my professors and my people in academia that I know, is like, they don't care, like maybe they know you can have these experiences, but not only do they say it's just a hallucination, they also think it's insignificant, right? And then maybe kind of like in the cluster that I think you're in, it's kind of taking a lot of these experiences to kind of like mean what they feel like they mean, like alien communication and so on, which, to be completely honest, I'm absolutely open to this, being like external realities. And, if that is true,
this is, we need to talk about the entities in a moment, but this is where everything completely changes for me, because I could understand this explanation, and I've been looking into this for some time, thinking this is just a product of my brain or my body, whatever. This is not a real realm. This is basically something my brain has created because there's a psychedelic substance in my bloodstream at the moment. So here's when it gets really interested. I don't mind having the honeycombs as the expression of, as you said it, just basically the basic structure that we will probably use as a common denominator for everything in our mind and also in our external world, like you mentioned, the crystals. So that's fine. I get it. Here's when it gets really weird. When I was having these visions of honeycombs, an entity showed up who was a bee queen, and she had an incredibly meaningful conversation with me about my childhood. She basically talked to me about how I save insects, drowning in puddles, that kind of stuff. I always do it. I feel like every being deserves to live and exist. I always save little mosquitoes, bees, whatever. I take them out, or if I see a worm in the middle of the road, I'll put it on the side so it doesn't get squashed, that kind of stuff. And she basically showed up saying that she has a lot of gifts for me, and that one of those gifts was a video that I created. Basically, she gave me a wealth of information on how deals work in our reality. Basically, she allowed me to tell people how we're supposed to take advantage of everything that comes our way so that we can improve our lives. It's a complicated thing, but I made like a full video out of that one gift. This is basically, it's not that I decided that I will now think about bees and bee colonies or hives. Well, no, there was just this geometrical pattern, and out of it came a bee, which is obviously related. So this is where I think it's not just a geometrical correlation to whatever our DNA expression or whatever our minds create. Now, there's a more profound example, and this is of these patterns. Very often, these geometrical, symmetrical patterns becoming alive. And the most interesting aspect of it is that they very often represent or turn into spaceships. And this is something both me and Starpilot, my friend, we share the same type of a phenomena, sensual phenomena, where we experience flying these ships. So they're made of these patterns, they're made of these geometrical, whatever they are, figures or just, it's difficult to define them, just these geometrical clusters of beauty. And they very often make spaceships, or they turn into spaceships, and we fly in them. And it's very difficult to explain, but the whole concept of traveling in the spaceship is based on the geometrical transformation of this. It is as if animation was fueling the actual spaceship that is made of those frames that create that animation. It's super complex to explain. Also, very often when I ask questions, when I need some answers, I will receive the answers after the entity puts this question into some sort of machinery, some sort of like a furnace that teleports that question somewhere else. And this machinery is usually made of those geometrical patterns. So very often this honeycomb structure will create this machine that sucks out my question, it goes somewhere to another dimension, and then it comes back. Very often I traveled through those machines together with my question, which is a totally abstract thing to explain, but I did that, and I visited that other dimension where my answer was being forged, when my answer was being created. I was just visiting these patterns, and then I would come back in the same manner. Just the pattern around me, the geometrical structures and visions would turn into a machine that would transport me somewhere else. And the reason why me and Starpilot talk about this is because she has this same thing. So it's like a shared hallucination. So this is where I would think that maybe it's not just an expression of our biology when it comes to those patterns.
No, I understand what you mean. I mean, the spaceship experience, tell me something. Does it feel like you're going to a kind of different type of space when you go? Like, it's not like,
absolutely,
normal...
Yeah, the totally different dimension.
Yeah, right? Different dimension with different, almost kind of like different rules for how space and time work together.
It's not just that, it's made of, because these dimensions are very often made of emotions. So basically they're created of totally different. It's not even a human emotion. It's not called sadness or anything. These are emotions you cannot even name. They're so complex that you feel them, but you cannot name. It's like one of those qualias, probably.
Oh yeah, exotic qualia for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean this is excellent. This is a excellent thing to discuss. So, I was mentioning at the beginning that there is this kind of duality between the shapes of the experience and the feelings of the experience, and yeah, I mean something that basically is people have noticed that I've talked to that. It seems to be kind of a reliable property of tryptamine experiences, including mushrooms and DMT, is that the symmetries inside these, as you called it, kind of a walls of beauty or something like that.
Yeah.
How I interpret a lot of this is they are the particular shape that they have basically gives rise to different patterns of consonance, dissonance, and noise. So, and this is like where also the holistic, non-local properties of consciousness really like shine. And like, I mean, I think like this whole experience that you're describing of like going into these objects and kind of or sending information to these objects and then like getting a processed information back is exactly what I'm trying to get at when I talk about the holistic computational properties of consciousness. That when you have these complex geometric objects on a DMT or mushroom experience, they encode information like emotions, and they are basically encoding it in a non-local way. So it's not like you can point and say like, oh, this dot right here is my sadness. It's like, no. The sadness or the joy is distributed across this kind of like slab of symmetry. And each of those like slabs of symmetry basically can compound each other. And that's what I refer to as identifying the algebra of how these symmetries operate with one another. And there's a lot of like interesting like emergent effects. Like, for example, you can take two slabs of beauty or slabs of symmetry that each of them feel kind of like tense and they feel kind of stressful or unpleasant. And if you combine them in the right way, sometimes they can form a third shape in their combination that actually is completely blissful, that doesn't have like the unpleasantness of either of them. And vice versa. I mean, you can, similar to like when you listen to two songs of two different styles of music, maybe both songs are beautiful on their own, but if you play them at once, it's going to be a mess. It's very unpleasant. Likewise, there are incompatible patterns of beauty in these spaces. Like some of these beautiful, imagine a geometric castle made of gems, high-dimensional gems, and then a spaceship. Maybe the style is different, and like they actually don't go well together. They cause a lot of dissonance if they come together. So a lot of the processing that goes on in these states, my interpretation, based on a lot of information, is that what you're doing is actually valence computing. And by that, what I mean is that you're using these shapes in order to encode information about your life, and then using the mathematical properties of these shapes in order to basically explore alternatives and points of view. And it does it in a very efficient, high bandwidth way, such that, you can achieve a breakthrough in psychotherapy in a 4-hour session that would have taken 5 years, because in those experiences, you actually have all of the information loaded up and you have the tools to combine them in this very exotic, high-dimensional way.
Well, the interesting thing is that, of course, I can talk about how I feel about this, and that would take away the credibility of what I'm about to say, because I feel these realms are very real. It doesn't feel like it's product of my brain, because it's very distinct in a way that I think I know myself well enough to understand what my brain is capable of. And maybe, but again, it's just a subjective thing. Maybe my brain has more computing power and more possibilities that I don't know about. Now, the problem is that space in which all of this is happening seems to be like a completely separate entity of its own. And it's not like, you know what I'm trying to say is that it's a vision on top of a vision. And combined together, they're alive. Now, the problem is that Star Pilot, not only she flies these spaceships, she also fixes them for the entities. The entities come to her saying, you're the expert, you need to tell us what's wrong with this spaceship. And she fixes them. She works on the engines. Then, if I remember correctly, the engine is part of this, is like a heart of that entity, because these spaceships are actual entities, they're alive. And all of this feels like a very complex, you know, they're shared. That's the problem. Both of us have the same type of a sensation, if you want to call it a sensation, that is just the product of our imagination. Both of us, me and her, we feel the same way about a trip, and we both have the same sensation of getting on a spaceship, being in that spaceship, watching other dimensions from the windows of that spaceship. And then, she flies them. I don't. I'm just a passenger. And then we arrive in the same way. Everything's the same way. So I think it's very unlikely that a brain would create type of a sensation that is so detailed and so it matches somebody else's experience in the same way. That's what I have a problem with.
Definitely. And as I mentioned, I'm very open to this being actually real. I'm also just very interested in, pursuing, like, what does it take for them to actually be hallucinations? And I can say a bit more. Two things. One is this whole concept of like energy sinks that basically, based on how the brain is built and basically how we compute information, there's this thing where like whatever you can recognize lowers the energy of your consciousness. So, for example, on a DMT trip, let's say, or mushrooms, like let's say like a magic eye level. So something that happens is that you experience this like sense of spaciousness, kind of the space is vibrating, and it kind of looks like maybe you've seen when you have like a very hot pavement and you look at it. Yeah, you get kind of these like
Fata Morgana.
What is it called?
It's called Fata Morgana, I think. I'm not sure if that's the if you can translate it to English, but that's it's this mirage type of a heat-generated mirage.
Exactly. Yeah. So that quality on mushrooms or DMT, can fill up your visual scene. It's kind of this spacious, reverberating pattern, and if you recognize something in it, it's like, oh, this like piece of the space right here is kind of like the corner of a chair. Then the whole space can start to collapse into that interpretation. And then like, rather than it being kind of a spacious 3D thing, it becomes flat. Well, it's like flat with a depth map. So it's what we call a world sheet, which is basically how you encode the distances to the things around you visually. And basically what you can recognize can absorb energy, and it forms as kind of the place where it crystallizes. And once you notice that this is an effect, you can kind of like play with it and like stay longer in the more spacious place, which I generally think is more blissful rather than the kind of like collapsed and compactified interpretations. But basically, the model here is that narratives also have this energy sink property. So if you start interpreting the experience from a certain angle, and you're kind of like used to interpreting it that way, that interpretation becomes a very powerful energy sink. And I would postulate maybe that explains why nowadays for you get the same experience of communication with machine elves reliably, is because, in this model, that would be kind of a energy sink narrative. That is like a narrative that your brain expects this to be the case. And so it crystallizes the energy of the mushroom state into that type of narrative.
Okay, so this is basically about that. So we need to talk now about the entities. We need to move on to this because this is basically I'm still looking for the answer. I've been looking for more than 5 years. I think I arrived at my answer, but it's my personal answer. It's based on my experiences. But again, they're very personal, very subjective, so they don't necessarily need to be true. Now, what you've just described feels like you're describing a psychedelic observer's paradox. So your expectations from an observation create that very object that is being observed. At least that's how I understood it. Now, the problem with the entities is that when I took mushrooms for the first time, I had absolutely no idea what it feels like. I took mushrooms because I watched an episode of Joe Rogan with Amber Lyon where they talked about the antidepressant type of effect that it has on your body. I was trying to get rid of depression. And when I took mushrooms for the first time, it obviously it did the job immediately. It was amazing. But what I wasn't expecting is this telepathic communication from outside. So I went into the experience without having any expectations, without having any idea about what mushrooms do. And I didn't even know about anything like psychedelic entities. And they started talking to me. They obviously started to immediately solve my problems. They gave me answers to questions that I had for 20 years. All of this it was fascinating to say the least. It changed my life pretty much. But when I came out of this experience, basically the next day when I got sober, I started Googling and I started looking up all the information that I can find on mushroom aliens. And at that time, in 2015, there wasn't anything. There was only Terence McKenna who had some ideas about machine elves and some theories. That's why I still call them machine elves. But there was nothing back then. There was nothing on YouTube, nothing online. People on shroomery.org basically laughed at me saying that it's just my imagination, it's nonsense. So I started making videos to tell people about this. And then it turns out everybody has the same experiences. Again, they're shared experiences. What's more interesting is that we all get the same messages. They're all related to being connected to all of us being one, to nature being alive. All of this is very, very universal, and it doesn't really feel like it's something that could be projected by my own brain. It could be, obviously, but I want to know from you, number one, have you had any experiences with these entities? And number two, what do you think they are?
I mean, it sounds like there's three big questions I should address. So the first one is, why are there like common narratives or common themes like, spaceships and so on?
Right.
Second one is, why is there this theme of, fixing, like fixing spaceships or fixing yourself or like, machine elf doctors and so on. And the third one is, why this kind of like theme of oneness and love and unity and harmony, why is that such a common experience and like so powerful and like personally I think like very, very valuable type of message. Okay, so why is there themes, to address the first question? Think about it perhaps as like our normal brain operates by combining harmonic modes. Basically the various electromagnetic resonant modes of the brain are combining with one another in order to create this world simulation inside of your brain. It's kind of like a piano in a sense. Like each of the harmonic modes is a different note that you can play, and there's like different chords that sound good and chords that sound bad. And it's sort of like we live most of our life playing only a small region of the piano that only contains, this range of possible notes. You take magic mushrooms, and literally in this reading, you're actually expanding the number of notes that you can play. And all of a sudden, you can also play a lot of notes that are like much higher frequency. And the thing is that, yes, imagine that all of a sudden you're experiencing these higher frequency notes. Some of them are kind of like playing spontaneously. So there's only so many ways in which you can kind of like use that expanded repertoire in order to arrange the sounds in a way that sounds harmonious. So, based on experiences and talking to a lot of people, it's something like a spaceship type of experience is a way in which you can organize all of these vibrational modes of your experience in a way that they go well together. And yeah, because we share like similar biology, the number of ways in which you can organize kind of like these higher frequencies together so that they don't clash with each other is not an infinite number of them. There's actually only a finite number of possible consonant harmonious combinations. So yeah, that takes me to the second part, which is like, yeah, this phenomenon of DMT doctors or mushroom doctors and fixing spaceships and so on. And this makes a lot of sense, at least in my model, which is that the parts of the experience that are discordant are, in a sense, are indicating problems in your subconscious. Basically, the things that are like rattling in your subconscious will appear as dissonant shapes or dissonant configurations or objects that don't quite work. They don't fulfill their purpose. And the task of kind of like fixing those objects is a way of actually fixing the subconscious. I mean, you're kind of like rewiring the energetic pathways of the subconscious such that they are now in a harmonic relationship. And, you know, this, in this model, you know, like the machine elf doctors and so on, they are kind of like helper hallucinations that your subconscious generates in order to make it easier to organize all of this chaotic mass of energy into more harmonious shapes, which is ultimately all that we're doing all the time. We're trying to increase our valence, our harmony, our symmetry, our consonance. Yeah, I guess to address the last one, which is why the messages of oneness and unity and love. Well, the reason is that very high-dimensional, highly consonant and symmetrical experiences, phenomenal objects, are very high valence. They feel very blissful. And yeah, I mean, when you experience something like that, you basically realize that there's so much more potential to experience awe and love in your world that you knew it was possible before. And these objects essentially become the self-organizing principle for the rest of your experience. And yeah, I mean, it makes sense that one kind of will organize one's life around these type of awesome, blissful and loving experiences, because they contain actually kind of this order to them that you can basically spread throughout the rest of your experience, your energetic body, and they will fix things, generally speaking. So in our model, where things that go wrong in the nervous system basically cause dissonance, if you can create a super, super harmonious, high-dimensional experience, you can use that in order to heal other parts of your experience that are dissonant. Basically, it's kind of like putting a super, super healthy, you could say a super, super healthy person right next to a very, very unhealthy person, and kind of like just the proximity makes the unhealthy person acquire better habits and like basically better ways of living life that will move them towards the more harmonious, very healthy person.
So you're saying that these spaceships are basically a metaphor for pretty much the experience of your body healing on psychedelics, right?
Yeah, we could say that. And it's the doctors, I would describe them as annealing doctors. I mean, like, I think you talk in many of the videos, and I know what you're talking about, which is like, hey, like they might do like an operation in some part of your body and so on. And I think of that as like annealing. Basically, is like intelligent annealing. Is like you and your subconscious are working together in order to like melt the parts that are hurt and then recrystallize them so that they are more ordered.
I understand. Okay, so moving on to machine elves, because it's as much as we could probably explain the spaceship as that would make sense. I would actually be very happy if that was the case. What is your theory on machine elves? Is that what you've just explained? Are you saying that this is the explanation for the existence of these entities?
Yeah, I can elaborate further on like the theory of machine elves. And again, just to emphasize, is this just a theory? And I continue to be open to their independent existence. I'm not closed, but it's kind of in science is like, hey, let's see how far we can go with kind of a model that doesn't assume their independent existence. And of course, if we can't explain it, then yeah, we might need different models. But in the model where they are hallucinations, here is one thing that kind of explains it, which is on 5-MeO DMT, you can have profound alterations of consciousness, but there's no entities. There's no machine elves, there's no external intelligence. If anything, people describe kind of a direct communication with God or like with infinite consciousness, but it's not a personal thing. It's kind of this sense of profound oneness and harmony. Whereas DMT and mushrooms, they do generate a lot of kind of these entities. And one very big difference between 5-MeO and DMT is that 5-MeO tends to drive all of your nervous system towards a state of coherence. Basically, all of your nervous system becomes starts to fire in synchrony. It's almost kind of like seizure-like, although there's like some slight differences in that like it's traveling waves as opposed to like strobing waves. Some technical differences, but 5-MeO DMT has this unifying property. It unifies the mind. Whereas in our model, what DMT does is that, and mushrooms, what they do is that they create competing clusters of synchrony. The analogy, like hopefully this is a explain like I'm 5 analogy, but it's something that it's used in in neuroscience quite a bit, is that if you take a large wall, and you put clocks on it, on the wall, one of those like old clocks, like that they have like the pendulum clocks, and
those synchronize. I know about that.
Yeah, they will synchronize, but here's the thing: they will synchronize only if there are like a few of them, like if you have like 12 or something like that. If you have like a super long road of those clocks, they will never synchronize. Actually, what will kind of happen is that you will have like these waves of synchrony, or you will have like spontaneous regions of synchrony, but all of them don't synchronize together. But if you add connections between them, like if rather than clocks, there are kind of like neurons, and you can add synapses between clocks that are further away. Basically, if you start adding connections to clocks that are like somewhat far apart, you will probably intensify this effect of patches of symmetry. Like, hey, there's synchrony over here, but they're not synchronized with each other. But if you continue adding connections between them, eventually they're so connected that they can actually all of them enter synchrony, all of them together. So in this model, 5-MeO DMT does that. It basically shortens the path between neurons in the brain such that they can all work as one. They all become synchronized. Whereas regular DMT or mushrooms, they reduce the length of the path. Basically, they do increase the connectivity, they do increase the connections, but just not enough to actually create global synchrony. So in effect, what ends up happening is that you have clusters of synchrony. And each of those clusters of synchrony is kind of like trying to survive, is trying to kind of create a niche in your consciousness to continue to exist for evolutionary reasons. Patterns that are, try to continue their own existence are going to be the ones that actually are the most numerous. So you can think of a lot of these kind of mushroom type experiences as, there's like a lot of these clusters of synchrony, and they're trying to talk to each other in order to create a globally coherent and symmetrical experience, but it's difficult because they're just not exactly in the right shape for that to happen. So in the process of trying to create these like global symmetry, they generate a lot of information and a lot of interesting things happen. And roughly speaking, the entities would be kind of like big clusters of coalitions of these synchronies. They're like, hey, the synchrony over here that involves, a feeling in your leg, plus like a memory of your girlfriend, plus your visual field. Like that's one cluster of synchrony. Maybe a cluster of synchrony here has to do with like auditory sensations and tactile sensations. And that's a different one. And so they kind of like manifest as their own separate entities, and you can kind of interact with them separately. If you were to take 5-MeO, they would merge and they would actually just become one with you.
Yeah, this is the reason why I listen to you. I'm convinced that I need to sooner or later, and I think sooner than later, I need to try different types of psychedelics, because it's not enough to have a good understanding of these entities by just trying mushrooms. And well, the funny thing is that I also get in touch with these entities on weed, on smoking, just smoking weed now. So this is something that has changed for me. So it's, yeah, for me, weed became psychedelic. Now,
yeah.
That's something obviously that happens to a lot of people, and I made a video about this. And the reason I really enjoy making these videos is because every video triggers a lot of reaction from people, and they share their own stories. And again, it seems I'm not alone in all of this. It turns out that after psychedelic experiences, THC or I don't know, CBD, whichever of those substances is becoming psychedelic. So that's a really interesting aspect of all of this. But I wanted to say something else actually, because as I'm writing the book, because I'm actually putting all of this into a book, it's almost finished now. And in this book, I'm trying to make an argument how all of this is actually not a product of my imagination. And it would be actually nice for all of this to be just, generated by my synapses, by my hormones, whatever's in my brain doing this. That would be great, because then I could just enjoy the trip, not try to remember all the information and record it. And that would be it. I wouldn't need to, create the videos, everything like that. Here's the problem. Again, this is where it becomes problematic, because that was obviously what you said was my first explanation. That was when I told myself 5 years ago, this is what's happening. And the moment I stopped believing in this was when I met a family member. Machine elves have this ability to connect me with people who are deceased. Basically, there was a dead person who I was allowed to talk to. And that person in one of the realms told me a lot of facts and information that I had no access to, because I never met that person. That person died before I actually was a part of the family. So when I went back to that person's spouse and I told them about what I know, that person obviously started crying and said, how do you know all of this? This is something that only I know. Where did you get this information? This was the moment when I started thinking, this is not just my brain's hallucination. And that moment just started the whole process of me understanding that this is a supernatural phenomena and not my brain interacting with itself. Because the next thing that happened was that machine elves started predicting future for me. They predicted when I would lose my job. They predicted the lockdowns. They know what's going to happen. They tell me about this. And these are things that, when they told me about lockdowns and the whole pandemic and whatnot, I was like, this is definitely my hallucination. This is not true, but it happened. The same way they told me about me losing my jobs in the next few weeks. They said, you need to prepare yourself. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And then I lost the job. But one of the most bizarre things that happened was when I was able to connect with my recently deceased cousin who died of a heart attack, and he appeared to me with machine elves. Machine elves told me you'll be able to talk to him, and he appeared to me and he gave me a message, and he told me what's going to happen. Well, basically the message was about visiting his mom, my aunt, and when I went there, he said this is what she's going to say, and she said the exact sentence word by word as he predicted. And he also told me some things about his children that turned out to be true. It's just basically way beyond any realm of possibility of coincidence. It's just basically supernatural things that happen. There's more of them. I all describe them in my book now. But how would you explain this? What would be your interpretation of this?
Yeah, if there's enough of these things, eventually I would change my mind, especially if I experience it myself. And but no, And I definitely don't think that you're lying or trying to deceive anybody. So I mean, I definitely take seriously this type of reports. I guess like the interpretation where these are hallucinations, this sort of thing would be explained in terms of you having kind of like more direct access to subconscious information and being able to integrate subconscious information. So, I mean, something that happens, for example, when you're falling asleep or something like that, you sometimes kind of can remember somebody saying a particular word or a particular term or concept that maybe you weren't paying attention to, but as you're falling asleep or as you're tripping, it kind of like becomes very salient that, hey, this actually really matters for that person. And how do you know? Well, because your subconscious was keeping track of the body language and the emotional tone of the conversations. And you probably didn't consciously realize that like these themes were like present in, the conversations, maybe among family members and so on, but your subconscious did pay attention to that. And in that sense, these trips would be kind of like doing a lot of information processing and figuring out like, hey, wait a second, there is this pattern in your interactions, and there's this commonality, and it seems that, underneath maybe the facade or the presentation of this person, there's actually this worry, or there's actually this, unmet need or something like that. So that would be the interpretation. It probably wouldn't explain all of the phenomena you're describing, but maybe some of it.
Well, the funny thing was that you could definitely take something like this into account if it wasn't for the fact that these entities talk to me, well, things from other people's lives, and they talk to me about things that haven't happened yet. This is not something that your brain can accurately create. It cannot be generated by your brain because you don't know the future. It's basically something that you have no access to.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is when that was the moment, the first time because up to that point, I think it was like 3 or 4 trips, I was like, this is just my brain. I really enjoy it, but it's my brain. The moment when I started meeting that people and it all started, checking out, everything was perfectly as they said. When I was actually confirming this with other members of my family, that was the moment when I started treating this seriously. Also, what I didn't mention is that my brother actually had the same visit from my cousin, and he did something that I never told him about. He also never mentioned that he had the visit in a psychedelic state. He basically was allowed to see the world through his eyes, and it's something that machine elves allow me to do all the time. To make it even more interesting, they allow me to see these people's perception of a situation that I wasn't a part of, but was related to me. So basically, they allow me to see things that happened that I wasn't aware of. Basically, there was this one girl who didn't want to talk to me. There was something happening between us, and she wanted to avoid me. And I was walking down the street, and she saw me, and I saw how this girl felt and how she was hiding from me. And I had no idea that she was there. I knew that happened because I saw myself from from her perspective. I remember that moment as I was walking that street. I know when it happened. I know where it happened. It's just that I didn't know that she was there. And they showed me exactly the whole scene as it happened because we were meeting afterwards and we met after that thing. And everything that happened afterwards checks out because I actually, now that they showed me the whole situation, it started making sense because there were holes in that story that like my memory made no sense because I didn't know that she saw me. When I understood that she was a part of that experience, the whole memory changed. So it's not something that I could have come up with because I had no idea that she was there. And I could give you plenty of examples like that. It's just that it goes beyond human ability, your brain's ability to confabulate, to create a story when everything checks out, when everything connects and creates the reality, what it is now. So I do understand that it would be a perfect explanation, it would be the easiest one. Occam's razors, the simplest explanation is the most correct one, that it's your brain hallucinating, creating on different levels of perception, on different levels of, there are things that we don't know about the brain. We know very little about human brain, actually. So I can imagine that there are levels on which the brain functions in psychedelic states where a lot of things are possible. But you can never explain looking into the future or talking to or learning about things that are not a part of your reality. So this is what all of this for me becomes very complex. And that's why I would love to take your explanation and say, yeah, that's what happens, but it's just not possible. Also, the more I talk to people, it's been 2 years that I've been running 434, almost 3 now. So I get these reports all the time. It's not just me, it's everybody. So this is something that cannot be explained. And now I just came across, there's a peer-reviewed paper by somebody else. I think it's the American Journal of Psychology, I think they wrote it. And they actually took like a scientific approach to the whole thing. And they came to the same conclusion. They said this is not something that can be explained in scientific terms. We cannot base it on biology or hormones or whatever's happening in the brain. It just doesn't make sense. So there's slowly science behind all of this. It's becoming now this big thing where it's unexplainable, and the only logical explanation becomes that this is a completely different realm that we are getting access on psychedelics. What would you say? You being in those scientific circles and dealing with people like that, is that the consensus? Do people think that it's all a product of our imagination?
That's a great question. I think it depends from person to person, and I would say maybe 80% of the people I hang out with would generally say it's all in your head. But there's a solid 20% of pretty smart and rational people who are pretty open to the other possibilities or who've had unexplainable experiences otherwise. And all of the experiences that you mentioned are quite remarkable. So generally my advice here would be, if you get predictions about the future, ideally record them publicly, just to have a track record. And
they are there. Every time I get this, I make a video. It's out there everywhere.
Okay, cool. I'll definitely take a closer look at that. Definitely that phenomenon. All of that phenomena has to be you have to pay a lot of attention to it. I guess personally, I do feel, not to sound bad, but I personally do feel it's more likely it's a subconscious phenomena, or that something along the lines of we underestimate how smart the subconscious is.
Because I always like to think that our brain, something happens on psychedelics that your brain becomes, it has a life of its own suddenly, because it's everything connects and it becomes a super brain. But as soon as you start seeing dead people who tell you things you're not supposed to know, and then you get predictions about the future, that's when all of this, you can throw it out the window because it doesn't explain it. I think the Kingston College of London, one of those institutions, I don't remember which one, they're actually starting to, they have a department there where they're mapping those realms, and the contact with the entities, they're actually treating it seriously. And if you start looking into conspiracy theories, there's a lot of talk about these entities having connection with high profile people in our society. So it's not, it starts becoming like a more serious thing. It's not just that you see something on psychedelics. Apparently other people who've been doing this for a long time not only have access to it, they also take advantage of it. And if you want to go to CIA archives, you'll see that recently there's been a lot of CIA documents where they're having, they had projects in the past where they were just finding people who had these abilities to contact, entities not only in psychedelic states, but it was a serious thing that they were doing in the 70s. So, there's a lot of confirmation of all of this in other areas of our lives. So, if CIA is basically trying to get to the bottom of this, that's a serious thing. I think that's a serious argument for treating it more like more than just a brain chemistry, I think.
Sure. And something I'm also very happy to say is that independent of how it turns out, and as I said, I'm very open to other possibilities, that yeah, this the one thing that we are married to at Qualia Research is not, it's not the interpretation of like whether machine elves are real or not. Like that's we take, whatever happens to be true, we take it seriously. It would be, this notion of Qualia Formalism. I mean, basically that, if the spirit world is real and like, these entities are mind independent, they're out there, I would still claim that there is basically a rich mathematical structure that accounts for how all of this works. So, right, for a lot of people, it's kind of like, hey, either you're like spiritual or scientist. My take is that, hey, if the spirit world is real, there's probably going to be a physics of the spirit world. And it might be perhaps like implied by quantum mechanics. I mean, an example is, in Maxwell's equations of electromagnetism, when they first created them, they were created in order to explain, like magnets and electricity. But then if you actually play with the equations long enough, you can derive the fact that light is implied in the equations, that like light is a particular attractor of the way the electric and the magnetic field interact with one another. I mean, likewise, something exotic, like for example, like superconductors in physics, like they're implied by quantum mechanics. It's just that just because you have seen the equations of quantum mechanics doesn't immediately tell you all that can exist in the physical world. And likewise, I mean, I suspect something like the math of quantum mechanics probably describes the universe. And if there is a spirit world, it probably also follows the the laws of quantum mechanics. It's just perhaps like a different foliation of the universe, or a different cross section of the multiverse. But and the main reason why I think this is very important is that the symmetry theory of valence, I think, may still apply in the spirit world. That like for example, in Jainism, like they have these notions of how karma influences your birth, and they actually talk about like negative karma making you less symmetrical. That like actually the high level devas have like many types of symmetries, whereas like all of the people in the hell realms or like the purgatory realms, they always have kind of deformities and asymmetrical shapes. And I mean, I would suspect that the heaven realms could be mapped to some extent in terms of the symmetries that are present in them.
That's a very good explanation. You see, I'm so immersed in this idea of spirituality and metaphysics that I forget that you're right. This could be simply, it could be magic that we don't understand science of yet. So pretty much at some point we'll probably, that we'll go through the stages of, first we're ridiculing things, then we go through getting emotional about this, then we accept it, and then it becomes part of mainstream science. So maybe at some point we'll get to this stage where we realize that, all of this psychedelic phenomena is basically us being able to access maybe higher states of vibration. I mean, there's a very simple physical, just earthly example that recently occurred to me, that if you spin a propeller fast enough, not only will the propeller become invisible, but it will also become a stable object. And this is something very simple that we can do with our technology now, and realize that frequency and vibration completely changes the state of an object. So if we can do this on such a simple such a simple experiment, that I think it wouldn't be a big problem if one day we realize that what we see in psychedelic state is basically a completely different dimension that has a different vibration that is impossible to see in the real world, but is accessible in psychedelic states. And as you said, there could be a whole science connected to it. Basically, those realms have their own, their own physics or their own quantum mechanics, whatever. So that's actually a very good explanation. I like it.
And I mean, also that the very way in which love exists it's something that we could probably understand with the mathematics of harmony. That those loving realms, blissful heaven realms, they are precisely the places where basically consciousness can travel without stress or distortions or resistance. And a lot of that has to do with kind of having a very smooth geometry. Whereas, basically the unpleasant realms have like discontinuities and imperfections, and have like misshaped regions of space-time that basically distort the flow of consciousness. So there's kind of this, I would say, like duality between the laws of love and geometry, which is kind of crazy to consider. And likewise, if something like karma turns out to be real, I would suspect it's something that we can probably understand in terms of, for example, like patterns of electromagnetism, where basically whenever you do something with a bad intention, you are literally trapping a dissonant waveform inside some kind of topological segment of the wave function, and that sooner or later, that dissonant waveform will get back to you. So in that sense, even things like the law of attraction, if we actually postulate additional layers of reality, there could be a whole physics there that, like the intentions that you send out, like are literally, patterns of consonance or dissonance and harmony trapped in kind of topological bubbles that they go out into the world and eventually they come back to you like boomerang. So there's, whatever you put in is whatever you will receive in the long term.
Oh, that's horrible, because I contacted you being fascinated by this science, and now that we talk about this, the way you explained it, it seems like if you can explain it by science, you take away the magic, because there's the whole industry of spirituality and metaphysics, because we all believe that this is magical, but then one day people like you will probably figure it out. We'll have the equations, we'll have the understanding of it, and it will be no longer magical. It will be just basically, yes, there is a higher frequency, there's a different dimension. Yeah, what's the big deal? That's how you access it. And this will be a sad day for everybody, I think.
No.
We replace religion now with psychedelics, because one of the beautiful things is that the messages I get and everything that I see and hear is very spiritual, and it's deeply rooted in ancient human religions. Every religion, like this equation, this geometrical equation I received of love, joy, and hope, is basically, it's the same that you will get in every single religion. What's funny is that I found a document issued by Trump administration where they argue for creating a world based on love, joy, and hope. I have that document. I'll put it in the next video. So it's a universal thing. It's nothing major. It's like a key that will allow you to hack your life and this reality, because if you apply love, joy, and hope to every single area of your life, it will become amazing. It's like the phi number, the Fibonacci sequence. If you apply it to any creation, it will be perfect. It will be beautiful. It will work. And I believe that in a spiritual sense, in an emotional sphere, if you apply this equation of love, joy, and hope, you will also achieve amazing results. But as you said, it could be just simple science behind all of this. There's nothing magical. Maybe it's just something we don't know yet. In the same way as everybody looking at planes 100 years ago would be saying that it's a magical machine, whereas it's simple, Rolls-Royce engine propelling a pile of metal. So, yeah, thank you for that.
No, but I mean,
you just ruined it for everybody. No, but it's important. I have very pragmatical, very logical approach to everything. My videos are becoming more and more scientific, and I really enjoyed what we've just did, because we've dissected the whole thing. We looked at everything from your perspective, which is very scientific, very logical, very rational. Whereas I'm more emotional. I always try to explain everything in a way that it's borderline magic, which it doesn't have to be necessarily. It's just something we don't know yet. So your perspective is very important, and I'm glad that science is slowly getting mature and open enough to accept what we've been, like people like Terence McKenna have been trying to tell the whole world for decades. Now Dennis is doing this, and now I'm trying to tell everybody about this, and it's good. It's good to find people like you and find these papers now where everybody's trying to accept it slowly, but it's happening. So yeah, what would you say is the future of all of this? What is the future for your research? Where would you want to go with this?
Yeah, definitely. Just to briefly comment on, yeah, I mean, like, something I often say, it's that reduction cuts both ways. So, I mean, it may be true in some way that, like, okay, these patterns of, love and harmony, maybe they reduce to, in some sense, to shapes in the quantum fields, and like the physical dynamics that underlie that. At the same time, it goes the other way too. I mean, it means that the electromagnetic field and the fields of physics are actually fields of love. So it goes both ways. Like, I generally don't think that, basically identifying the rich mathematical structure underlying these crazy phenomena, it doesn't take away from them. In a sense, it just clarifies them. And when it comes to, as you just asked, like, what is the future of this type of research? I think actually understanding it will allow us to basically spread this love way faster in the world. Because let's say, like, we can optimize kind of like, for example, how healing happens. If the machine elves are helping you heal, kind of like in this doctor kind of a situation, we can probably figure out what are the optimal set and setting conditions, or perhaps like technology we can include in the trip, such that healing becomes more optimized, and like one doesn't resist it as much, or one lets it flow more easily. And also, I think like a lot of people will be like way more open to these sort of transformations of consciousness if we actually have some level of scientific understanding about them, that it's not completely, I mean, of course it's going to be spooky on some level because consciousness is crazy, but it's not going to be kind of this, delving into the complete unknown. Like, at least with some level of science, we can say like, well, under these conditions, there's a 99% chance you will have a very loving trip that is going to lead to very healing annealing, as we were talking about. And I think, that's very, very important that we make sure that people don't have like, disaster trips, we could say. And instead, basically load the dice in the favor of actually having very loving and healing experiences. In terms of kind of the QRI in particular, like, we're currently doing like a lot of like rigorous neuroscience research on how do the resonant modes of the brain, the electromagnetic resonant modes of the brain, basically give rise to valence and symmetry. So that is kind of like a big project. We will probably need like more funding to actually complete that project, but we expect it to complete somewhere in early next year and publish a paper about it. There's also like this technology that we are developing, which is basically, we call it LSV, which is light, sound, and vibration. So like, how when you go to a concert and you're close to kind of like one of the big speakers, I mean, maybe you're wearing earplugs just to not make it so loud, but like the proximity to these speakers allows you to feel the music in your body, right?
Oh, yeah.
And oftentimes the light show is also a very important part of the experience. So basically, actually just combining consumer products, although we also have like our own hardware we have been developing, but even just with consumer products, you can basically craft this kind of like mini rave experience where you actually use these like vibrating plates and a stroboscopic stimulation and audio, and they're all synchronized. And when you do that, the intensity of the awe of the music that you experience goes up by like at least like 50 or 60%. And on a psychedelic, it generally grounds the experience and it makes it kind of like very, very, very healing. So we basically are positioning ourselves as having the basically the mathematical model for like what gives rise to a healing psychedelic experience. And then in a sense, we're trying to ultimately generate this technology so that it becomes kind of an option for people who undergo psychedelic therapy in a few years from now, when that becomes more mainstream, that we ideally will have like studies that show like, hey, with this technology, the incidence of bad trips are much lower, and also people report like, you know, more healing experiences in the long run. And then finally, we also have like, you know, you could call it a play on actual philosophy of mind. So like we are writing papers for academic philosophy journals. And a very important topic for us is actually having to do with consciousness and AI. That and this is, I mean, a lot of people think that we are kind of woo only for this reason, which is that we think that digital computers cannot be conscious. Like, it doesn't matter how you program a computer. It doesn't matter if it's a supercomputer. We basically argue that you cannot create a conscious digital computer. It can trick you into making you believe
imitating consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. Now, a quantum supercomputer, we think, can be conscious, but we are pretty far away from actually a quantum computer that you know would have like anything resembling any sort of like animal experience. You know, the number of quantum qubits that you need to put in coherence, it's just like so many, and like the chips that exist right now are like basically a speck relative to what you actually need.
It would be an interesting twist if you actually got to the stage of developing a quantum processor, and then the moment you attach it to a computer, it becomes alive, and then you realize that there's no difference between that generated consciousness and your consciousness, which would imply that you're also a generated consciousness. That would be a scary moment where we would realize that we are also generated, because there's no distinction now between them and us. And that would be an interesting revelation, I think.
Yes. Well, I mean, in our model, you and I, like these moments of experience, we are basically waves in the fields of physics, basically the quantum fields. So, I mean, like if you can recruit those waves for computation in a quantum computer, it's going to be also conscious in its own way. I mean, we're also panpsychists. I mean, like we actually believe that it sounds like silly, but you know, like rocks are conscious. It doesn't mean that like a rock is a mind, because a mind is a very sophisticated thing. They're just like micro experiences. Like if you were to zoom into the tiny components of a rock, you would find that it's made of tiny crystals. And each of those crystals, we would expect, are tiny specks of qualia. Like there may be like a speck of blue, a speck of, you know, green or pleasure and so on. But they don't form a mind. But if you arrange matter in the appropriate way and you energize it in the appropriate way, you may actually create very complex experiences. So, I mean, in the long term, I also actually expect that we will be able to basically merge with other quantum fields. So, basically neural bridges that connect brains so that we become one consciousness. That I think it's also, quite a likely possibility for the future.
I think we're on the verge of an incredibly fascinating world that will make us look like cavemen. Basically, we'll go into areas of science and we'll discover so much so fast, because you know the progress now, the technological progress and advancement of everything is geometrical. It's exponential. It's basically growing so fast now that the moment you actually invent a quantum processor, the rate at which you will develop new technologies will be just astronomical. It will be imminent, instantly. We will transform the world into something we've never experienced. And maybe that's Joe Rogan has this idea that humans are just a larva stage of a much more complex organism. And it would be interesting to see what happens. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do. But I think we will not get to see it. I think in the next 40, 50 years, it would need to happen. I don't know. Maybe it will. Who knows? But it feels like at the moment we're just children in a fog, just trying to figure out. We're blindfolded. We're trying to touch something and try to make shapes out of it. And we just don't understand what we're doing. And that's how I feel going through this, this field of psychedelics. And, the reason I'm talking to you is because I don't understand it. I've been doing this for 5 years. I've had hundreds of trips. I've talked to thousands of people. And I'm still nowhere near to understanding what it is that we're all experiencing. So I hope that science and what you guys are doing will actually not only validate, make it more accessible to everybody, because it does help a lot to merge these two. It's mushrooms are going from Woodstock to psychiatrist offices. That's pretty much what's happening at the moment, and that's a great transition. I think it's very beneficial transition to everybody. So that's great that you're actually doing this, and I think at some point both of these worlds will need to meet and work together, and I'm really looking forward to this. So thank you very much for this conversation. It was incredibly interesting. I hope we'll do it again one day. I still have half of the questions I wanted to ask you, so we've talked for more than 2 hours. We haven't even got to the how. It's always like that. But tell people where they can find more about you, where they can learn more about your project.
Definitely. The main place would be qualiaresearchinstitute.org. My personal blog is qualiacomputing.com, and I mean, like, really, Qualia Research kind of like emerged out of my collaboration with Mike Johnson, who has a blog called opentheory.net. And yeah, I mean, eventually we realized that, like, hey, actually all of these pieces we've been writing, we can probably formalize them a little bit more and turn them into papers. And that's what you find in the qualiaresearchinstitute.org. I also have a YouTube channel. If you just Google my name on YouTube, you'll find it pretty easily. And yeah, I'll intend to do like quite a few more videos to basically provide kind of a analytical scientific angle to basically explaining a lot of like really crazy consciousness phenomena. I think like the next video I'm going to be making is precisely about explaining why digital computers cannot be conscious. So yeah, that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, I will definitely include the links in the video description, so everybody listening can go there and just look them. I highly recommend these articles. I haven't seen, other than your speeches, I haven't seen any of your videos, but I'll probably do that because they're really fascinating. They a completely different view on psychedelics than we, psychonauts have. I think it's very, very good to have different mindsets and different points of view, and it's definitely developing you in the right direction. So yeah, everybody should definitely check you out.
Thank you. And one last maybe word of advice for people is that I mean, like the symmetry theory of valence has ultimately applications, and like if you're in a trip, I would recommend basically paying attention to like whether you're in a state of harmony, and sometimes you may be kind of like stuck in some thought loop or attractor, and you may think that the way to solve it is to kind of like think really hard about it, but sometimes actually the way to solve it is just stretch a little bit, do some yoga, playing some beautiful new age music like Enya or something very harmonious like that, and all of a sudden the vibe of the trip will change entirely. So anyway, that's just a piece of advice. And the other very wonderful thing that I've been exploring recently that I recommend others to take a look at is in Buddhism they call the 7 factors of awakening, which are basically things that you can fortify in meditation. And they are basically things that allow you to stay at a place where you're neither too excited nor too relaxed. It's kind of just the ideal place to kind of like change your mind and think very interesting or healing thoughts and experience healing emotions. So yeah, definitely look it up. I have an article called Buddhist Annealing that basically goes over the 7 factors of awakening and how to cultivate them in meditation. And the more you cultivate them in meditation, the more they will be kind of your friends in a psychedelic trip that will kind of help you out in balancing the forces and putting you in a good place.
Oh, that's great advice. Thank you very much for this, Andre. Okay, well, thanks again. And yeah, wish you all the luck you need, all the funding and everything that's necessary to work on your projects. And I hope we get to see some effects of all of this soon.
Fantastic. Likewise, all the best luck to 434.
Thank you.
Subscribe and follow. Like and share this video. For merchandise, go to shop.b434.com. leave your email address at news.b434.com. For more info or contact, visit b44.com and join 44's social media on YouTube, Facebook, BitChute, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and VK. Talk to each other on Reddit, Discord, and Telegram. All links in the video description.